Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1, The Mirror's Curse. Introduction. Sophia was a 27-year-old woman with a fascination for all things vintage. She spent weekends exploring flea markets, searching for unique pieces to decorate her apartment. On one such trip, her attention was caught by a large antique mirror with an intricately carved frame. The dark wood was etched with strange symbols, and the glass had a faint, silvery glow that seemed to pulse under the light. The vendor, an old man with sunken eyes and a raspy voice, noticed her interest. "This mirror is not just a decoration," he warned. "It reflects more than your image. Whatever you do, don't look into it at midnight." Sophia dismissed his words as a sales gimmick meant to make the mirror seem mysterious. She bought it, amused by the man's theatrics, and placed it in her bedroom, unaware of the nightmare she had invited into her life. Day 1, a strange reflection. Sophia admired the mirror throughout the day, marveling at how it seemed to brighten her room despite its dark frame. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she stood before the mirror brushing her hair. The reflection, as always, followed her movements precisely. She smiled at herself and turned off the light. But as she walked away, she caught a flicker of movement from the corner of her eye. Turning back, she stared at the mirror. Everything appeared normal, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that her reflection had delayed for just a fraction of a second. Day 2, midnight curiosity. The vendor's warning echoed in her mind the next day. Don't look at it at midnight. She laughed at herself for being unsettled. That night, unable to resist her growing curiosity, Sophia set an alarm for 11:55 p.m. When the clock struck midnight, she stood before the mirror, her room bathed in moonlight. At first, everything seemed ordinary. She tilted her head left, and her reflection did the same. But then something changed. Her reflection smiled. Except Sophia wasn't smiling. It was a sinister, mocking grin that sent chills down her spine. Frozen in place, she watched as her reflection raised a hand to wave, even though she hadn't moved. Sophia stumbled backward, switching on the lights. The reflection returned to normal, mirroring her terrified expression. Shaking, she decided she must have imagined it. Day 3, the reflection's independence. The next day, Sophia avoided the mirror, draping a blanket over it. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, her mind kept drifting back to that smile. When she returned home that evening, she found the blanket crumpled on the floor. Sophia felt a pang of unease. She lived alone. How could the blanket have moved? Summoning her courage, she approached the mirror. This time, her reflection was perfectly normal. But as she turned to leave, the reflection remained facing forward, staring directly at her back. It didn't move until she turned around again, at which point it quickly aligned itself with her movements. Panic gripped her. She knew something was wrong with the mirror, but she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. Day 4, the mirror's secrets. Sophia spent hours researching the mirror online, trying to find information about its origins. She found vague references to cursed mirrors in folklore, objects that trap the souls of the unwary. According to legend, such mirrors fed on their owners' fears, growing stronger with every glance. Desperate for answers, she called her best friend Clara and begged her to come over. Clara arrived later that evening, skeptical but willing to help. Together, they examined the mirror. When Clara stood before it, nothing unusual happened. She laughed, calling Sophia paranoid. But when Sophia stood in front of the mirror again, her reflection turned its head to look directly at Clara, even though Sophia hadn't moved. Clara screamed, backing away. "What the hell is that?" she cried. Sophia could only stare in horror as the reflection grinned once more, its eyes glinting with malice. Day 5, the reflection comes to life. Sophia decided to leave the mirror covered again and sleep in her living room. But that night, she woke up to soft whispers echoing through the apartment. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Then she heard her own voice coming from her bedroom. "Come here, Sophia. I want to show you something." Terrified, she grabbed a flashlight and crept to the bedroom door. The whispers grew louder, shifting to laughter. She flung the door open to find the blanket once again removed from the mirror. Her reflection stood on the other side of the glass, no longer mimicking her movements. Instead, it leaned forward, placing its hands against the surface of the mirror as if trying to push through. "I see you," it hissed, its voice distorted. "Let me out." Sophia fled the room, locking the door behind her. She knew she couldn't ignore the mirror any longer. Day 6, the vendor's warning. Determined to get rid of the mirror, Sophia returned to the flea market. She found the old vendor sitting in the same spot, as if he had been waiting for her. "I told you not to look at it at midnight," he said, shaking his head. "What is it? Why is it doing this?" Sophia demanded. The vendor explained that the mirror was crafted by a sorceress centuries ago. She had used it to trap the souls of her enemies, binding them to the glass. Over time, the mirror developed a hunger, pulling in anyone who stared too long into its depths. "You can't destroy it," the vendor warned. "If you try, it will consume you. The only way to break its hold is to face what it shows you without fear." Sophia returned home, unsure if she could follow his advice. How could she face something that wasn't human? Day 7, the final confrontation. That night, the mirror's power reached its peak. Sophia woke to find her apartment completely dark, the lights refusing to turn on. The mirror glowed faintly, casting the room in an eerie light. Her reflection was waiting for her, now fully independent. It stepped out of the mirror, its form shifting and shadowy. "I am you," it whispered. "Every fear, every regret, every lie you've ever told. You can't hide from me." The reflection began revealing moments from Sophia's past, mistakes she had buried, betrayals she had committed, and fears she had refused to confront. The memories swirled around her like a storm, growing louder and more oppressive. Sophia realized the mirror fed on her guilt and fear, using them to strengthen its hold. Summoning every ounce of courage, she faced the reflection and shouted, "You're not me! I'm not afraid of you anymore." The reflection screamed, its form shattering into shards of light. The mirror cracked, emitting a blinding flash before falling silent. Epilogue. The next morning, Sophia found the mirror in pieces on the floor. For the first time in days, her apartment felt warm and peaceful. She swept up the shards and took them to the flea market, intending to dispose of them. But when she arrived, the vendor was gone, and his stall was empty. As she left the market, she noticed a small, antique shop she hadn't seen before. In the window sat a familiar mirror, its surface perfectly intact. The reflection in the glass smiled at her, and she realized the curse wasn't broken after all. Story 2, The Whispering Forest. The Whispering Forest was a place of legend in the small, isolated town of Elmswood. Known for its dense canopy and perpetual twilight, the forest was shrouded in mystery. For years, locals spoke of people venturing into its depths and never returning. Some claimed the forest was haunted, others believed it was alive. But for Emily, Ryan, and Jake, 3 adventurous friends, the forest was just another place to explore. One crisp autumn morning, the trio decided to venture into the Whispering Forest, excited by the challenge of unraveling its secrets. Equipped with backpacks, flashlights, and a map that ended at the forest's edge, they set off, oblivious to the horrors that awaited them. Day 1, the first signs. Forest seemed ordinary at first. Tall trees, a carpet of dry leaves, and the occasional sound of rustling wildlife. But as the group ventured deeper, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, and an unnatural silence fell over the woods. Jake noticed it first. "Do you hear that?" he asked, pausing mid-step. Emily frowned. "Hear what?" "That's just it," Jake said, his voice uneasy. No birds, no wind, nothing. The group pressed on, trying to shake off their unease. An hour later, they stumbled upon something strange. Carvings on the trees. Each carving depicted a face, etched with astonishing detail. Some faces appeared serene, while others were contorted in expressions of fear or pain. Ryan leaned closer to inspect one of the carvings. "These look real," he muttered, his fingers tracing the grooves. "That's creepy," Emily said, pulling Ryan away. "Keep moving." As they walked, the carvings became more frequent, each one more grotesque than the last. The faces seemed to follow them, their hollow eyes glaring as if warning them to turn back. The whispers begin. By late afternoon, the group realized they were lost. The map was useless. None of the paths matched what they saw. Frustrated, Ryan suggested they set up camp and regroup in the morning. As night fell, the forest grew darker than they had anticipated. Their campfire flickered weakly, barely illuminating the surrounding trees. That's when the whispers began. At first they were faint, soft murmurs that could easily be mistaken for the wind. But as the night deepened, the whispers grew louder and more distinct. Emily, a voice hissed, sending a chill down her spine. She looked around, expecting to see one of her friends playing a prank, but their expressions mirrored her fear. "You heard it too?" Jake whispered. "Said my name," Emily replied, her voice trembling. Ryan tried to laugh it off. "It's just our imaginations. This place is messing with our heads." But the whispers didn't stop. They became relentless, calling out their names and weaving together incomprehensible phrases. Day 2. The first disappearance. The next morning, the group packed up and tried to find their way out of the forest. But the deeper they walked, the more twisted and unfamiliar the terrain became. The trees seemed to shift when they weren't looking, closing off paths and creating new ones. By noon, Ryan suggested splitting up to cover more ground. Despite their initial hesitation, Emily and Jake reluctantly agreed, each taking a different direction with a promise to meet back in an hour. When Emily and Jake returned to the agreed-upon spot, Ryan was nowhere to be found. Their argument was interrupted by the sound of laughter, childlike and haunting. They turned to see a figure darting between the trees. It was small and fast, impossible to get a clear look at. "Who's there?" Emily shouted. The laughter faded, replaced by a deep, guttural growl. Before they could react, Jake was pulled into the shadows by an unseen force. His screams echoed briefly before being silenced. Emily searched frantically, but Jake was gone. In his place was another carving, this one bearing his likeness. The heart of the forest now alone, Emily pushed forward, her fear giving way to determination. She realized the forest wasn't just alive, it was sentient. It was playing with her, feeding on her terror. As night fell again, Emily stumbled upon a clearing. At its center stood a massive tree, larger than any she had ever seen. Its bark was blackened and its surface was covered in countless faces, all writhing and shifting. The whispers converged, growing louder as she approached. Emily recognized Ryan and Jake's voices among them, pleading for help. The tree seemed to pulse with life, its branches stretching toward her like skeletal arms. She noticed an axe lying nearby, its blade rusted but sharp enough to cut through wood. "You want me to destroy it, don't you?" Emily muttered, addressing the voices. "Save us," they whispered in unison. The final confrontation. Emily grabbed the axe and swung it at the tree with all her strength. The moment the blade struck, the forest erupted in chaos. The ground shook, and the faces on the tree screamed in agony. The tree retaliated, its branches lashing out like whips. One struck Emily, knocking her to the ground. She crawled back to her feet, blood streaming from her forehead, and struck again. Each swing seemed to weaken the tree, but it also sapped Emily's strength. The faces began to fade, their voices growing fainter. Finally, with one last swing, Emily split the tree's trunk. A blinding light erupted from the crack, and the forest fell silent. Epilogue: The Cost of Freedom. When Emily awoke, she was lying at the edge of the forest, the morning sun warming her face. She looked around, half expecting to see Ryan and Jake, but she was alone. Returning to town, she told the locals what had happened, but no one believed her. The forest still stood, though it seemed less menacing now. The faces on the trees were gone, and the whispers had ceased. Months later, Emily visited the forest again, hoping to find closure. As she wandered through its now quiet paths, she noticed a single carving on a tree near the entrance. It was her face, etched in perfect detail, her expression one of quiet sorrow. Story 3: Shadows of the Forgotten Town. Nestled deep within a remote valley, Black Hollow was a town lost to time. Once a thriving mining settlement, it had been abandoned decades ago after a series of unexplained disappearances. Locals in neighboring areas whispered tales of vengeful spirits and cursed grounds. They warned travelers to stay away, especially after nightfall. For Mark, an investigative journalist, the town was the perfect story. Known for debunking urban legends, he believed the tales of Black Hollow were nothing more than superstition. Accompanied by his photographer friend Lisa, Mark set out to document the forgotten town. Their journey, however, would uncover truths far darker than any legend. Arrival in Black Hollow. The The road to Black Hollow was treacherous, winding through dense forests and overgrown paths. As Mark and Lisa approached the town, the air grew heavy with an unexplainable stillness. The town itself was eerily intact. Wooden houses stood as if frozen in time, their paint peeling but their structures sturdy. A rusted sign greeted them at the entrance. "Welcome to Black Hollow, population 328. This place is a gold mine for our article," Mark said, snapping photos of the deserted streets. Lisa, less enthusiastic, couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. "It's too quiet," she murmured. Ignoring her unease, Mark led the way into the heart of the town. They decided to start their investigation at the old town square, where a dilapidated clock tower loomed over the surrounding buildings. First encounter. As they explored the square, Mark and Lisa found signs of sudden abandonment, plates left on tables, toys scattered in yards, and an eerie stillness that seemed unnatural. Lisa's camera began to malfunction, its screen flickering with static. "Great," she muttered, fiddling with the settings. Mark, meanwhile, noticed something strange. In the windows of the houses, shadows seemed to move, shadows that didn't belong to him or Lisa. "Did you see that?" he asked, pointing to one of the houses. Lisa glanced up just in time to see a dark figure retreating deeper into the building. "Maybe it's an animal," she suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Mark wasn't so sure. Gripping his flashlight tightly, he approached the house. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of decay. The furniture was covered in dust, but the floor bore fresh footprints. "Hello," Mark called out. His voice echoed, met only by silence. They ventured further into the house. A low whisper began to fill the air. The words were indistinct, like a chorus of voices overlapping. Lisa grabbed Mark's arm. "Let's go, now." Before they could leave, a sudden crash upstairs made them both jump. Mark, ever the skeptic, insisted on investigating the marked wall. They climbed the creaking staircase to find an empty room at the top. The only thing of note was a large cracked mirror leaning against the wall. On closer inspection, Mark noticed something strange. Words scratched into the glass. "Leave now or join us." Lisa took a step back, her face pale. "This isn't just some prank, Mark. Something's wrong here." Mark was about to respond when the reflection in the mirror shifted. Instead of their own images, they saw the room filled with shadowy figures, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. The figures began to move, stepping toward the glass as if trying to break through. Mark grabbed Lisa, and they bolted from the house. Covering the town's secret, shaken but determined, the duo decided to regroup and make sense of what they had seen. They searched the town's library, hoping to find records or clues about Black Hollow's past. Inside, they discovered an old journal belonging to the town's mayor, dated 1932, the year the disappearances began. The entries started normally, detailing the town's growth and the opening of a new mine. But as the pages progressed, the tone grew frantic. The mayor wrote of miners hearing voices deep underground and seeing figures that weren't there. Workers began to vanish, and those who returned were changed, speaking in cryptic riddles before wandering into the woods, never to be seen again. The final entry read, "The darkness has taken hold. The town is lost. May God forgive us." As Mark read the words aloud, the air in the library grew cold. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. Books toppled from shelves, and shadows flickered along the walls. "Need to leave," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "Night falls in Black Hollow." By the time they stepped outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon. Darkness enveloped the town, and the oppressive silence returned. Mark and Lisa hurried toward their car, but as they reached the outskirts of town, they found the road blocked by a massive fallen tree. It hadn't been there before. "We'll have to walk," Mark said, though his confidence was waning. As they made their way through the woods, the shadows seemed to follow them, darting between the trees. The whispers grew louder, now forming coherent words. "Stay with us." Lisa tripped over something and screamed when she looked down. It was a skeleton, its bony hand clutching a rusted lantern. Surrounding it were more remains, each one positioned as if they had been trying to escape. Mark pulled Lisa to her feet, and they ran, but no matter how far they went, they always ended up back in the town square. Shadows take form. Back in the square, the shadows began to coalesce, forming humanoid shapes. Their movements were jerky, as if they were marionettes controlled by unseen strings. One figure stepped forward, its voice a deep, guttural growl. "You cannot leave. You belong to us now." Lisa screamed, and Mark swung his flashlight at the figure, but the beam passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The figures advanced, forcing Mark and Lisa into the clock tower. Inside, the whispers became deafening, a cacophony of voices repeating the same phrase. "Join us. Join us. Clock tower's truth." At the top of the clock tower, Mark and Lisa found an altar surrounded by candles, their flames flickering despite the absence of wind. On the altar lay a book bound in cracked leather. Mark opened it, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and incantations. Among them was a chilling passage. "To seal the darkness, a sacrifice must be made. One soul for the many." The shadows filled the room, circling the duo. The lead figure spoke again. "Choose. One stays and the other may leave." Mark and Lisa stared at each other, their faces pale with fear. "We can't do this," Lisa whispered. But the shadows began to close in, their touch icy and suffocating. Sacrifice. In a moment of desperation, Mark made his decision. He pushed Lisa toward the exit. "Go! Get out of here!" "No!" Lisa cried, but Mark shoved her harder. The shadows seized him, pulling him toward the altar as Lisa fled down the stairs. His screams echoed through the tower as the shadows consumed him. Lisa reached the town's edge just as dawn broke. The shadows receded, and the whispers ceased. When she turned back, Black Hollow was gone, replaced by an empty valley. Story 4. The Haunting of Ashmere Manor. For centuries, Ashmere Manor stood on a wind-swept hill overlooking the quiet village of Ravenswood. Its Gothic architecture, complete with gargoyles and sprawling gardens, was the stuff of legend. Yet the manor's grandeur was overshadowed by its dark history. A string of violent deaths, mysterious disappearances, and inexplicable events that left the locals convinced the house was cursed. When Nathaniel and Clara Gray, a married couple fascinated by the paranormal, purchased Ashmere Manor, the village was abuzz with warnings. The Grays, however, dismissed the tales as exaggerated folklore and saw the house as a golden opportunity to investigate its history. With their teenage daughter, Lily, they moved in, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. Day 1, settling in. The Grays arrived on a cloudy afternoon, greeted by the eerie silence of the manor. Its interior was surprisingly well preserved, with antique furniture, elaborate chandeliers, and portraits of the original owners, the Ashmere family. Clara marveled at the house's beauty. "It's like stepping back in time," she said, running her fingers over a mahogany banister. Nathaniel was more interested in the stories. "This place is a goldmine of history," he said, unpacking his camera and EVP recorder. Lily, however, felt uneasy. As she explored the upper floors, she thought she saw movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow darting across the hallway. She called out, but no one responded. Shrugging it off as her imagination, she joined her parents downstairs. The first night that evening, the family gathered in the grand dining room for dinner. The flickering light of the chandelier cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. "The place has character," Nathaniel said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings." As they clinked glasses, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. The family froze. "Probably just the house settling," Clara said, though her voice betrayed her unease. Nathaniel grabbed a flashlight and ventured upstairs, calling for Lily to stay with her mother. As he searched the dimly lit hallways, he noticed one of the portraits. A stern-looking man with piercing eyes seemed to follow him. "Just my imagination," he muttered. Returning to the dining room, he found Clara and Lily visibly shaken. "We heard whispers," Clara said, "like someone was right behind us." Nathaniel tried to reassure them, but the night would only grow stranger. As they prepared for bed, doors slammed on their own, cold drafts swept through the rooms, and the faint sound of music, a piano melody, drifted through the air. 2. The Ashmere Legacy. The next morning, Nathaniel and Clara dove into research, sifting through old documents they found in the manor's library. They learned that the Ashmere family had been prominent in the 1800s, known for their wealth and influence. But tragedy struck when the family patriarch, Victor Ashmere, was accused of practicing dark rituals. Victor's youngest daughter, Margaret, disappeared one stormy night, and the family's servants were found dead in the cellar, their faces frozen in terror. The remaining Ashmeres fled, leaving the manor to decay. "This explains the rumors," Nathaniel said, intrigued. Meanwhile, Lily explored the house on her own, drawn to the east wing. There, she found a locked door with strange symbols etched into the wood. She swore she heard a child's laughter on the other side. "Hello?" she called, but the laughter faded. Later, when she told her parents, Nathaniel dismissed it as overactive imagination. Clara, however, looked worried. "We should be careful," she said. "This house has a way of getting under your skin." The manor awakens. That night, the disturbances intensified. The piano music returned, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps. Nathaniel set up recording equipment in the main hall, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal. As they reviewed the footage, they saw flickering lights and heard faint voices. But the most chilling discovery came when Clara spotted a figure, a woman in a black dress, standing at the top of the staircase. "That's impossible," Nathaniel said. "We didn't see anyone while recording." The family decided to sleep in the same room for safety. But sleep eluded them as the whispers grew louder, now clearly speaking their names. At 3 a.m., the locked door in the east wing slammed open, shaking the entire house. Lily's connection. The next day, Lily began to act strangely. She spoke of a friend named Margaret who lived in the house and claimed to have seen her playing in the garden. "Lily, there's no one else here," Clara said, alarmed. "But she said she wants to show me something," Lily insisted. Clara and Nathaniel grew increasingly concerned, especially when they noticed scratch marks appearing on Lily's arms. "She said it's the house," Lily whispered one evening. "It doesn't like us here." Nathaniel, still determined to uncover the truth, delved deeper into the manor's history. He found an old journal belonging to Victor Ashmere. The entries detailed his experiments with summoning spirits, culminating in a ritual to trap a malevolent entity within the house. One passage stood out. "The house is alive. It feeds on fear. It will never let us go." The East Wing Revelation. Determined to end the nightmare, Nathaniel and Clara decided to investigate the East Wing. Armed with flashlights and a crowbar, they pried open the locked door. Inside, they found a small room, its walls covered in symbols similar to those on the door. At the center of the room was an ornate music box. When Clara wound it, the haunting piano melody echoed through the air. The temperature plummeted, and shadows began to gather in the corners of the room. A voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." The shadows coalesced into a humanoid figure, its face obscured by darkness. Nathaniel tried to stand his ground, but the entity lunged at him, throwing him against the wall. Clara screamed, grabbing the music box and running. The entity didn't follow, but the house seemed to shake with fury as they fled back to the main hall. The final stand back and we'll find back in the main hall. Clara realized the music box was the key. "It's tied to the house," she said. "We need to destroy it." But as they prepared to smash it, Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes vacant. "You can't," she said in a voice that wasn't her own. "House won't let you." The entity from the east wing appeared behind her, its shadowy form looming over the staircase. It spoke through Lily, "Leave now, or she stays with me forever." Nathaniel and Clara hesitated, torn between their daughter's safety and breaking the house's hold. Finally, Clara made a desperate choice. She threw the music box into the fireplace, smashing it to pieces. The entity screamed, its form unraveling as the house began to collapse. Nathaniel grabbed Lily, and the family ran as the walls crumbled around them. Epilogue: Freedom and Loss. The Greys barely escaped as Ashmere Manor imploded, leaving behind only a smoldering ruin. For weeks, they struggled to make sense of what had happened. Lily recovered, but she had no memory of her time in the house. Nathaniel and Clara, however, were haunted by the experience. They often felt they were being watched, and at night, they sometimes heard the faint sound of piano music. Epilogue: Freedom and Loss. The Greys barely escaped as Ashmere Manor imploded, leaving behind only a smoldering ruin. For weeks, they struggled to make sense of what had happened. Lily recovered, but she had no memory of her time in the house. Nathaniel and Clara, however, were haunted by the experience. They often felt they were being watched, and at night, they sometimes heard the faint sound of piano music. Months later, while sorting through their belongings, Clara found an old photo of the Ashmere family. Standing in the background was a shadowy figure with hollow eyes, watching them with a sinister smile. Ashmere Manor was gone, but its darkness lived on, forever tied to those who dared enter its domain. Story 5. The Watchers in the Woods. Hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains, there was a dense forest known to the locals as Hollowshade. It was a place of beauty and danger, its towering trees and thick underbrush exuding an air of ancient mystery. For generations, stories had been whispered about the Watchers, shadowy entities said to live in the woods, silently observing those who dared to enter. For a group of friends, Emma, Jake, Mia, and Ryan, the legends of Hollowshade were nothing more than folklore. Adventurous and thrill-seeking, they planned a weekend camping trip into the heart of the forest, eager to prove the tales wrong and experience the raw beauty of nature. Little did they know, the Watchers were real, and they were waiting. The arrival. The group set out early on a crisp autumn morning, their backpacks loaded with supplies and spirits high. The forest was breathtaking, bathed in golden sunlight that filtered through the canopy. Birds chirped, leaves crunched underfoot, and the scent of pine filled the air. "This place is incredible," Mia said, snapping photos with her camera. Emma, the practical one, studied the map. "We should reach the clearing by sundown," she said, leading the group deeper into the woods. As they ventured further, the forest grew quieter. The cheerful birdsong was replaced by an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Jake, ever the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe the Watchers are taking a coffee break," he quipped, earning a nervous laugh from Ryan. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. They set up camp, lit a fire, and shared stories under the stars. But as the fire crackled and shadows danced around them, a strange sensation crept over Emma. It felt as if they were being watched. First night. The group settled into their tents as the fire died down. The night was dark, the forest shrouded in an oppressive silence. Emma lay awake, unable to shake her unease. The stillness was unnatural, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Suddenly she heard faint whispers, soft, indistinct, and coming from all around. "Jake? Ryan?" she called out, but there was no response. Stepping out of her tent, she saw shadows flitting between the trees, too fast to be animals. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a dissonant chorus. Before she could wake the others, a guttural growl echoed from the woods, freezing her in place. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, staring at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. The moment broke when Jake emerged from his tent, flashlight in hand. The eyes vanished, and the whispers stopped. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, his voice groggy. Emma hesitated. "I thought I saw something." Jake shrugged it off. "Probably just an animal. Let's get some sleep." Emma couldn't sleep. The eyes haunted her, and she felt the Watchers were closer than ever. Strange discoveries. The next morning, Emma told the group about what she had seen. While Mia and Ryan were sympathetic, Jake dismissed it. "You probably imagined it," he said. As they packed up to explore the area, they noticed something strange. Large, claw-like marks on the trees surrounding the clearing. The marks were deep, as if something massive had raked its claws against the bark. "This isn't normal," Ryan said, examining the gouges. "Could be a bear," Jake suggested, though his tone lacked confidence. As they hiked, they found more unsettling signs. A deer carcass stripped of flesh, strange symbols carved into rocks, and piles of stones arranged in intricate patterns. Mia snapped a photo of one of the symbols. "This looks man-made," she said. "Maybe someone's messing with us," Jake said, though the unease in his voice was clear. Descent into terror. By midday, the group had ventured deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, blocking out the sunlight, and the air became colder. The whispers returned, faint but persistent, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. They stumbled upon an old cabin, its roof caved in and walls covered in moss. Inside, they found remnants of a camp, rusted cooking pots, a torn sleeping bag, and a journal. The journal belonged to a man named Henry, who had come to Hollowshade decades ago. The entries began as mundane observations about the forest, but soon descended into paranoia. "They are watching me," one entry read. "Their eyes glow in the dark. They whisper my name. I can't escape." The final entry was smeared with blood. "If you find this, leave. They won't let you go." Emma slammed the journal shut. "We need to leave. Now." But as they turned to leave, they heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, encircling the cabin. Watchers reveal themselves. The footsteps stopped, replaced by silence. The group huddled together, their breaths shallow. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was humanoid but impossibly tall, its limbs elongated, and its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its head tilted unnaturally as it stared at them. Jake grabbed a stick and swung it at the figure, but it vanished before the blow landed. The whispers erupted, deafening and chaotic, as more figures appeared outside the cabin, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. The group bolted from the cabin, running blindly through the woods. The watchers pursued them, their movements swift and unnatural. The lost trail. The forest seemed to twist and shift, disorienting the group. No matter which direction they ran, they couldn't find their way back to the clearing. Ryan tripped over a root and screamed as a watcher loomed over him. Before the others could react, the creature dragged him into the shadows. His screams faded into the whispers. Mia sobbed, clutching Emma's arm. "What do they want?" "They're playing with us," Emma said, her voice trembling. Jake, determined to fight back, threw a rock at one of the watchers. The creature caught it mid-air and let out an ear-splitting screech. The ritual circle. As night fell, the remaining three stumbled upon a clearing unlike the one they had camped in. At its center was a circle of stones, each engraved with the same symbols they had seen earlier. In the middle lay Ryan's body, lifeless and surrounded by glowing runes. Mia broke down, but Emma forced her to stay quiet. "We can't let them hear us," she whispered. The watchers appeared at the edge of the clearing, their numbers greater now. They began to chant in a guttural, otherworldly language, the runes glowing brighter with each word. Emma realized the watchers were performing a ritual. "They're trying to trap us," she said. Jake, in a desperate bid to disrupt the ritual, grabbed a stone and smashed one of the runes. The watchers screamed, their glowing eyes flickering. The escape. Taking advantage of the chaos, the trio fled. The forest seemed to fight back, branches clawing at them and the ground shifting beneath their feet. Mia, exhausted and terrified, collapsed. "I can't go on," she cried. Emma and Jake carried her, their determination fueled by sheer survival instinct. They finally broke through the tree line, the first rays of dawn illuminating their path. As they reached their car, the whispers ceased, and the oppressive weight lifted. They drove away without looking back, leaving Hollowshade and its horrors behind. Epilogue. The Mark of the Watchers. Weeks later, Emma, Jake, and Mia struggled to move on. Nightmares plagued their sleep, and they often felt as if they were being watched. One day, Emma found a strange symbol etched into her bedroom window, the same symbol from the stones in the forest. The watchers weren't done with them.